long ago, nestled among the rolling hills and whispering forests of the Hudson Valley, there lay a quiet little village called Sleepy Hollow. It was a place where time moved slowly, where the trees seemed to lean in to listen to secrets, and where the fog clung to the earth like a ghostly shroud. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the strange happenings in those woods, of whispers on the wind, of shadows that moved without bodies, and most of all, of the specter that haunted the old road near the church. They called him the Headless Horseman. Some said he was a Hessian soldier, a mercenary who lost his head to a cannonball in some long-forgotten war. Others claimed he was a restless spirit, doomed to ride forever in search of what he had lost. But all agreed on one thing. When the nights grew long and the autumn moon hung heavy in the sky, the horseman would return, galloping through the darkness with his terrible silent fury. And it was on just such a night, when the air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, that our tale truly begins with a man named Ichabod Crane. Ichabod was the village schoolmaster, a tall, gangly fellow with a nose like a knife and eyes that bulged with curiosity. He was a man of books and superstitions, equally fond of logic and ghost stories, though he'd never admit to fearing the latter. He had come to Sleepy Hollow seeking simple work, but the hollow, as it often did, had other plans for him. For you see, Ichabod had one great weakness, one that would lead him straight into the path of the horseman's wrath. He was in love, or rather, he was in love with the idea of love, and with the fortune of a certain Katrina Van Tassel, the fairest maiden in the valley. But Katrina had another suitor, a burly, loud-mouthed ruffian named Brom Bones, who had no patience for a thin, superstitious school teacher stealing his sweetheart's attention. And Brom, as it turned out, knew all the best ghost stories. Ichabod Crane was a man who fancied himself clever, too clever perhaps for his own good. He had a way of ingratiating himself into the good graces of Sleepy Hollow's families, especially those with well-stocked pantries and pretty daughters. And so it was no surprise that he often found himself at the Van Tassel farm, where the tables groaned under the weight of roast meats and spiced pies, and where Katrina's laughter rang like a bell in the evening air. Brom Bones, the village's brash and broad-shouldered hero, did not take kindly to this intrusion. Brom was a man of action, not words, a champion horseman, a master of pranks, and the undisputed king of the harvest games. He had long assumed Katrina would be his bride, and he had no intention of losing her to a scarecrow of a schoolmaster who jumped at his own shadow. So Brom played to his strengths. At every gathering, he made sure Ichabod looked a fool, tripping him during dances, filling his hat with burrs, and regaling Katrina with tales of Ichabod's cowardice. But his finest trick was yet to come. For Brom knew something about Ichabod that others did not. The man's imagination was as wild as the wind, and his fear of the supernatural was his greatest weakness. One evening, as the villagers sat around a crackling fire, swapping stories of ghosts and hauntings, Brom leaned in with a grin. "They say the Headless Horseman rides fastest on the night of the harvest moon," he mused, watching Ichabod's face pale. "And if he catches you on the old church road, well, let's just say you'll be keeping him company forever." The others laughed, but Ichabod's smile was strained. He told himself it was all nonsense, of course. But later, as he walked home beneath the skeletal branches of the trees, every rustle of leaves sounded like hoofbeats, and the harvest moon was coming soon. The night of the Van Tassel's harvest party arrived, and Sleepy Hollow was alive with music and merriment. Ichabod, dressed in his best and only suit, had spent the evening basking in Katrina's attention, though her smiles were teasing and her words elusive. Brom, meanwhile, sulked in the corner until the ghost stories began again. This time, the tales were darker. An old farmer claimed to have seen the horseman just last week, his shadow stretching long across the road. A widow whispered that the spirit only appeared to those who had wronged him in life. And then Brom, with a smirk, added the final twist. They say he's buried in the churchyard, but on nights like this, he rises, and he's always looking for a new head to replace the one he lost. Ichabod's laughter was too loud, his jokes too forced. By the time he left the party, the moon was high, the wind was howling, and his heart thudded like a drum in his chest. His old borrowed horse plodded along the path, its ears twitching at every sound. The trees seemed to reach for him, their branches clawing at the sky, and then a distant gallop. At first, Ichabod told himself it was just the wind. Then it came again, clearer now, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, faster, closer. He dared to glance back. There, in the moonlight, rode a figure, tall, cloaked, and unmistakably headless. The horse's eyes burned like embers, and in the rider's hand gleamed something sharp and cruel. Ichabod's scream tore through the night. He kicked his horse into a frenzy, but the horseman kept pace, gaining with every thunderous stride. The church bridge was just ahead, the one place, legend said, where the specter could not follow. If Ichabod could just reach it. Ichabod's horse flew over the road, its hooves barely touching the earth. Behind them, the Headless Horseman loomed, his cloak streaming like smoke. The bridge was so close, just a few more yards. With a final desperate leap, Ichabod crossed onto the planks of the old church bridge. He whirled around, gasping, expecting to see the horseman vanish as the tales promised. But the specter did not stop. It surged forward, and at the last second, Ichabod saw the truth. The horseman was not vanishing. He was throwing something. The object spun through the air, striking Ichabod square in the forehead with a sickening thud. The schoolmaster toppled into the dust. When dawn broke, the villagers found only 3 things on the bridge: Ichabod's hat, a shattered pumpkin, and the lingering scent of gunpowder. Of Ichabod himself, there was no trace. Some said he'd fled the hollow in terror. Others swore they heard ghostly laughter in the woods, 2 voices, one booming and familiar, the other high with panic. As for Brom Bones, he married Katrina within the year, and whenever the story was told, he'd chuckle and refuse to say another word. But on certain autumn nights, when the moon is full and the wind carries the sound of galloping hooves, the people of Sleepy Hollow still lock their doors early. The morning after Ichabod's disappearance, Sleepy Hollow awoke to an uneasy silence. The Van Tassel farm, usually bustling with activity, stood quiet as a tomb. Servants exchanged nervous glances as they went about their chores, jumping at every creak of the windmill's sails. Katrina moved through her days with hollow eyes, starting whenever a twig snapped underfoot. Down at the old churchyard, the sexton made a grim discovery. fresh hoof prints in the damp earth, circling the burial ground before disappearing into the woods. What chilled him more was what lay beside them, deep gouges in the soil as if something heavy had been dragged. The villagers murmured of a midnight burial, though no grave appeared disturbed. Brom Bones, for all his boasting, grew uncharacteristically quiet. He took to drinking at the tavern until late, his laughter a touch too loud, his hand never far from his hunting knife. When children dared ask about the horseman, he'd silence them with a look that sent them scurrying. Some noticed he avoided the church road entirely, taking the long way home, even in daylight. Then the harvests began to fail. First it was old Van Ripper's cornfield, stalks found flattened in perfect circles one morning, as if something massive had rolled through. Then the apples at Philip's orchard turned black on the branches, their flesh rotten, though the skin remained unbroken. Worst of all were the pumpkins, carved with jagged grins before the knife ever touched them, their hollowed-out shells filled with brackish water that smelled faintly of the grave. The minister preached against superstition, but even he couldn't explain the nightmares plaguing the village. Children woke screaming of a headless man peering through their windows. Horses refused to cross the church bridge, their nostrils flaring at some unseen terror. And on foggy mornings, farmers reported finding strange footprints in their fields, boot marks that ended abruptly, as if the walker had simply vanished into air. One October evening, a traveling tinker brought news that froze the blood of every tavern patron. He'd passed through a neighboring town where folk spoke of a gaunt schoolmaster answering to the name Crane, a man who jumped at loud noises and kept his collar perpetually high, as though hiding something beneath. The autumn of Ichabod's disappearance became known as the year the moon bleed, for on the night of the harvest festival, the celestial orb had glowed an eerie crimson through the valley's perpetual mist. Since that fateful year, every decade without fail, when the crimson moon returns, some fresh horror visits Sleepy Hollow. In 1799, 3 drunken revelers vanished from the church road, leaving behind only their tankards, still full, but frozen solid despite the mild night. In 1809, the widow Wycherley's entire flock of sheep was found stacked in a pyramid at the crossroads, their wool white as bone, but their eyes completely missing. The year 1819 brought the infamous galloping fever, where 13 children simultaneously awoke, speaking in a guttural tongue before falling into a sleep from which none stirred for exactly 13 days. Now, as 1829's crimson moon approaches, the oldest residents whisper behind gnarled hands. They remember the original legend differently, not as a prank gone awry, but as a warning. The horseman wasn't some random Hessian, they murmur, but a British spy executed by Washington's men during the Revolution. A man who promised with his dying breath to ride again whenever outsiders meddled in hollow affairs. Katrina Van Tassel Bones, now a silver-haired matriarch, keeps her shutters bolted tight each October. Her grandchildren laugh at her superstitions, until the night they find her standing barefoot in the pumpkin patch, tracing the strange symbols that have appeared overnight on every gourd, symbols that match the war medals Brom Bones always claimed to have found in the woods. As the first frost creeps across the church bridge, something stirs in the abandoned schoolhouse. The desk where Ichabod once taught remains oddly clean of dust, and on particularly still nights, the villagers swear they hear the faint scratch of a quill. The eve of the 1829 Harvest Festival dawned unnaturally still. The Hudson River lying flat as a mirror beneath sulphur yellow skies. By noon, every dog in the hollow had begun howling in unison, their muzzles pointed toward the ruined mill where the old Hessian was said to have camped. The minister's wife fainted upon discovering every Bible in the church open to the same passage. And his name that sat on him was Death. At twilight, a stagecoach rattled into town bearing two unexpected passengers, a Professor Dietrich from Heidelberg University and his assistant, a pale young man who kept his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. They took rooms above the tavern, where Dietrich excitedly questioned locals about persistent spectral phenomena. His assistant remained silent, though the barmaid later swore she saw his hands, unnaturally long-fingered with nails like yellowed parchment. That night, as the crimson moon rose, the Hollow's children began sleepwalking. Dozens of them marched in perfect unison toward the church bridge, their nightshirts fluttering like shrouds. When their parents tried to wake them, the children spoke with one voice. "He comes for the lyre." Brom Bones Jr., now the spitting image of his father at his fiercest, rallied men with torches and muskets. They found Dietrich's assistant standing at the bridge's center, hat finally removed to reveal nothing amiss, just a nervous young scholar, until the first musket ball passed clean through him. Then the screaming began, not from the assistant, but from Brom Jr., as his own hunting knife flew from its sheath to hover at his throat. The torches guttered out as one, and in the sudden darkness came the sound every soul in Sleepy Hollow feared most, the thunder of spectral hooves upon the old dirt road. As the villagers fled, Katrina Van Tassel Bones stood frozen on her porch. The years fell away from her as she recognized the rhythm of those hooves, not the frenzied gallop of a headless specter, but the precise cadence Brom Sr. used to impress her at riding competition so long ago. Somewhere in the moonlit woods, a new pumpkin rolled to a stop. This one bore no carved face, yet from its hollow depths came a wet, rattling chuckle. As the last echoes of hoofbeats faded into the mist-shrouded woods, Sleepy Hollow awoke to a morning unlike any other. The crimson moon had vanished, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that pressed upon the village like a burial shroud. The children who had sleepwalked remembered nothing, though their night clothes were damp with grave dew and their pockets filled with withered maple leaves. The tavern keeper made a grisly discovery at first light. Professor Dietrich's room lay in ruins, the walls scored with deep gouges as if by enormous claws. Of the professor himself, only his spectacles remained, the lenses shattered from the inside out. His mysterious assistant had vanished without a trace, though later that week, farmers would report finding strange patches of blighted earth where something heavy had clearly lain, and where nothing would grow for years to come. Katrina Van Tassel Bones was found at her kitchen table, her hands folded around a steaming mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her eyes stared unblinking at the opposite wall where someone or something had left a message scratched into the wood paneling. It was a single word in jagged letters. More? The villagers took it as a warning. They rebuilt the church bridge with iron nails blessed by the minister. They burned Brombone's old metals in a purifying fire that smelled suspiciously of sulfur. And every harvest moon thereafter, they left offerings at the crossroads, pumpkins carved not with faces, but with intricate protective sigils copied from Katrina's surviving journals. But the hollow never forgot. To this day, travelers report strange occurrences along that lonely stretch of road near to Old Dutch Church. Some speak of a gaunt figure glimpsed through schoolhouse windows, his quill scratching endlessly in a ledger only he can see. Others tell of a beautiful woman in colonial dress who appears beside the bridge, her finger pressed to lips in warning before she dissolves into mist. And on certain autumn nights, when the wind blows just right and the moon hangs heavy in the sky, you can still hear it, the distant rhythmic pounding of hooves, not the frenzied gallop of a headless specter, but the deliberate, patient trot of something that knows it has all the time in the world to hunt. And so, dear friends, the mists of Sleepy Hollow curl once more around this tale, tucking it away like a secret in the hollow of an ancient oak. But remember, legends never truly end. They simply wait for the right teller, the right night, and the right shiver down a willing spine. Until next time, this is Uncle Ben, banking the fire and hanging up my lantern. Sleep tight and mind the sound of hooves in the October dark.